You're about to see 3 favorite traps of Fischer that he used to destroy everyone from amateur players to super grandmasters. Coming in number 1 is the opening trap that you can use in the Italian game. This time Fischer is playing white against Reuben, who was indeed a fine player, one of the best players at the time. So Fischer goes for the Avon's Gambit, and that is a very dangerous opening weapon even nowadays, because after black captures, you then proceed with pawn to c3, hitting this bishop. The bishop needs to move. Usually your pawns will retreat either to c5 or to a5, but in both cases you have great opportunities to attack. Amateur players often bring it back to c5, which is in fact wrong, because after your intended move d4, you will win one more tempo hitting this bishop once again. More experienced players, such as Fine in this game, would play bishop to a5, which is indeed much stronger. Black here not only puts their bishop to an actual safe square, but also they seem to prevent this move pawn d4, as now they can grab your central pawn, and due to this pin, you can now recapture. But nevertheless, Fischer went for this line and simply castle right here, unpinning this pawn, making it possible to recapture the pawn on d4 on the next turn. And guess what your opponents will play in this position? Most of them will play the move that black played in this game, pawn takes c3. And it's hard to believe that this natural move is already a mistake, quite a big one, which usually leads to total disaster. Now white goes queen b3, hitting this pawn on f7, and after black defends it with the queen, knight comes out to c3 with a whole lot of threats. Now there's bishop to a3 coming, hitting the queen, maybe bishop g5, maybe knight to d5, and you already have this lead in development, and you just keep mounting pressure. Black played knight f6 in the game, but now after knight to d5, white nevertheless attacks. After the trade, this time the other knight is attacked, and after knight comes here to e5, white trades off knights and then continues with the bishop to b2. Not only that attacks the queen, but also it x-rays this pawn on g7. And in light of that, black moved the queen to g5 so that it keeps guarding the pawn. But Fischer decided to deflect the queen by going pawn to h4, and after the queen captures the pawn, now bishop takes g7 is possible, as this pawn is no longer guarded by the queen, and the rook in the corner is attacked. So that's how you win the game. And again, these moves of black are up to this day actually most common moves of black. Therefore, you can go ahead and copy what Fischer did here right in this game. After rook to g8, I play rook e1, delivering this check, and although black could take this rook, this would not change anything. In the game, he moved king to d8 straight away, and white continued with queen to g3, which at first looks like an offer of a queen trade. But in reality, black just resigned, because it's not a queen trade. After queen takes g3, white would not recapture. There is a much better move, bishop f6, which is checkmate in 1. In the next game, he is still playing e4, which he called best by test, and this time black opted for the other common chess opening, the two knights game. Now white goes knight to g5, threatening this pawn on f7, and after d5 and a trade of pawns, black played a super common blunder, knight takes d5. Now, you might have heard about the fried liver attack, and it is known that in this position, white is supposed to win with knight takes f7. However, Fischer did not play this move. Why? Because he knew that there is actually a way which practically might be much easier to play. But let me first show you what's the problem with knight takes f7 straight away. Well, if you take this pawn, black recaptures, there is this queen to f3 follow-up where you attack both this knight and the king. And after king to e6, even though this position of the king looks vulnerable, it's still not that easy to finish the game off, because if you go knight c3, trying to capitalize on this pin and attack the knight once more, black can go knight b4, defending the knight, also threatening this pawn on c2. They are ready to play pawn c6 to overprotect this knight on d5, and although objectively white is better, the position is still very intricate and it's still not easy to win. That is why Fischer usually played the other move here. He played pawn to d4, which is a super tricky move, and in the main line you win the game really quickly but also easily. Now, what does it do? Well, you put some pressure, and if black captures it with either a pawn or a knight, usually they go down really quickly. If they take it with a knight, then you attack this knight, and it turns out that if the knight moves, this will now expose this knight on d5, as your queen is now active. This enables bishop takes d5. Now you're not only up a piece, but black still could not defend this pawn on f7. Most of your opponents, however, will recapture here on d4 with their pawn. And what can you do next? Well, you simply castle. Now, due to the absence of this pawn on e5, rook to e1 is coming, checking their king. Therefore, bishop e7 seems very natural, and there's not much black can do anyways. So bishop e7 aims to attack this knight, but we're not going to back down. We're going to sacrifice it. So you play sort of an improved version, or a simpler version of the fried liver sacrifice, and then after queen f3, it's the same double attack. Black can, of course, somehow go back, then you will just recapture the knight and continue your attack without any sacrifices. So if they wish to hold on to the knight, they have to make this reckless move king to e6. But this time, the pawn is on d4, not on e5 as it used to be, and that makes a big difference. Notice the pawn on e5 would shield the king, which is no longer the case. And now you can just go rook e1 with a pretty strong and devastating attack. Like try to cover up their king, but now after bishop f4, your Pinterest becomes their nightmare. Ironically, both knights are pinned and attacked at the same time, and this time it's really difficult for black to hold on. He played bishop f6, guarding this knight on e5, and Fischer came up with another brilliant move, knight to c3. Well, with all the due credit to Fischer, he was a genius player, and etc. But we also gotta say that actually similar ideas was used by Morphy before, who was also another genius. Now, knight c3 aims to attack this knight on d5, which is pinned, but also to speed up white's development and to break open the center once again. In the game, black just gave up minor pieces and resigned after that. The main line would be pawn takes c3. Then how do you continue your attack? Well, you keep blowing up the center. In this case, white were to trade in the center and then sacrifice the rook. And after rook to e1, now this king is wide open, right in the middle of the board, and it's easy to attack. For example, if the king goes back, now we can just checkmate it in one move. Fischer's most iconic trap can be used against the Sicilian Defense, which is the second most popular chess opening. This time Fischer is playing white against his long-term rival, Reshevsky. There were even stories how US could not keep them both into the US Olympic team because both of them wanting to play on the first board only, and they couldn't come to an agreement so who would be on the first board. But this time they're facing each other, so it's interesting to see who's going to be on top. So far we're heading to the main variation of the accelerated dragon variation, and black went knight a5, trying to trade off this active bishop on b3. At the time, it was considered a great move, because indeed, this bishop is a very strong attacking piece of white. However, Fischer played pawn e5, showing black straight away that this move knight e5 was actually wrong. This knight no longer controls the center, and white seizes the opportunity to start their attack straight away. Now, this pawn threatens to capture the knight and then to threaten this bishop on g7. Therefore, the knight needs to go. Notice that it can't go forward because of our queen, so the knight has to go back. Still, at this point, looks like black is doing perfectly fine. He's going to trade off this bishop, he attacks this pawn on e5, looks like he's just good. But white can ruin black's fun with this sacrifice bishop takes f7. A very counterintuitive sacrifice. And if black captures it with either rook or a king, there is another brilliant follow-up, knight to e6. White keeps sacrificing material, but black can't take it. If the pawn is captured by, if the knight is captured by the pawn, that opens up the queen, and it turns out that white wins material. At the same time, the queen has nowhere to go. Not only it's attacked, but all the squares where it could possibly go to are taken, including this square on a5, which is taken by their own knight. So finally, how about black capturing it by their king? Well, in this case, their queen is safe, but their king isn't. Now, after queen d5, the king has to move forward, and after that, white just attacks it however you want. It's pretty clear that white is going to win the game here. Probably there are many ways to win here. I love the most the move queen to d1, which not only shows that you are winning the game, but you're also kind of setting it up for the next one. And if you want to know a single rule that Fischer constantly used to play the most brutal chess ever, check out this video right here, and I'll see you on the inside.